Hey guys, my guest tonight, James Willis, is going to be talking about American cults. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. I guess my mind got too open. I'm trying to find. I have several of these. Sorry, guys. I have several of these things in my stock area, and obviously that's not the one. I got to figure this out. This is driving me insane. Anyway, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Charlotte. I am the host of the California Haunts Paranormal Radio Show. I get all messed up today. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you might think you have a paranormal thing going on in your house or business, we can get you. It might take us a while because California is a huge state, but we will get you. And in the meantime, if we can't get you right away, we have people on staff who can kind of help you by phone, talk to you about what's going on, maybe in some cases, settle things down for you. So that's one of the options we have. Okay, that being said, again, my name is Charlotte. We are broadcasting today via Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and TikTok. So we're beaming out everywhere, right? Anyway, my guest today is coming in to talk about something that I'm fascinated with, and that's cults. There have been so many stories of cults, like the Branch Davidians and people in groups like that. And he's done a lot of research. He's got a book out on the subject. His name is Jim Willis, and I think it's better if he tells you about himself, because you know how I am. And yeah, I think you're going to enjoy the show. So again, if you're watching from Facebook today and you haven't done so already, be sure to like and share the page, as well as, if you haven't done so already, follow me, because we're always looking for followers, and the more likes you give us, it puts us up in the algorithm. More people see us, we get more followers, yada yada yada. Just like with YouTube, same thing. There's a little ghost in the bottom right hand corner. Oh, look at my finger. Oh, there it is. Okay, there's a little ghost in the bottom right hand corner, and that ghost allows you to subscribe to our videos. We have 581 videos sitting over there, and they're all on different topics. I am a journalist, photojournalist. I don't like staying on the same topic all the time, so I love to do stuff like what we're doing tonight, just to change it up a bit. Like this week is going to be one of those hodgepodge weeks too, as well. So if you get on there, you like what you see, share it with friends and family. Tell them about us, and hit that little ghost, and that'll subscribe you. And what that does is it'll alert you to when we're going to have a new video out, or if we have new material out on the community page. All right, does that sound good to you? Okay. So now that I'm done yakking, I have one more thing to advertise before I forget. I'm going to be teaching a class on protection. That's going to be on May 6th at 7 p.m. Pacific, and you can get information for that at the California Haunts Paranormal Meetup, and that's where the information and where you sign up. $15 a person, and I'm going to be teaching major protection stuff. I've done all this research, and you should see the stuff that's out there. And I've talked to friends about this stuff, so I know it's what's being used out in the industry. Blah blah blah. So this is a good class for you if you want to protect yourself, your spouse, your family, your house, even your pets. I'm going to do protection for pets, because as a ghost hunter and being out in the field, there's always that fear that some negative energy is going to beat me home or follow me home and then go after my dogs and my cats. So I'm going to teach you ways to protect your animals. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to bring Jim in, and he can tell you about himself. Okay, here we go.
Thank you. Appreciate
Hello.
it.
How are you, sir?
With that introduction, I have to resort to some basic commercialism, because it reminded me so much of a book that I wrote a couple of years ago called The Quantum Akashic Field: A Guide to Out-of-Body Experience for the Astral Traveler. And in the book, I talk a lot about dowsing for earth energies and things like that. So it fit right in with that wonderful introduction. I appreciate it.
There you go. There you go. Tell me about you, sir.
Well, I was a Christian minister I still am, I guess. I have the Reverend in front of my name, although I haven't been in a church for 15 years. Mm-hmm. But I retired to the woods of South Carolina. I'm 3,000 miles away from you on the other side of the continent. But I did it for a specific reason. Most of us, when you go to seminary like I did when I was in my early 20s, most of us had the idea that you're going to grow up in a spiritual community where everybody is asking the right questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? What's it all about? And in that community, you think you're going to grow and spend the rest of your life. And it doesn't work that way. I'm afraid. When you become a pastor of a church, you're the CEO of a small corporation, especially independent churches. The denomination that I belong to recognizes total church autonomy. So each church makes its own decisions and all this kind of thing. But you get there and you're busy always planning. You're talking about the next sermon, the next church service, the next this, the next that. And I was a college professor, so it was always the next lecture series or
Sure.
what are you going to be talking about and all this kind of stuff. And pretty soon, then 40 years just pops by and you say, wait a minute, what's happened? None of the stuff that I came in here for, I've had time. I've been so busy talking about spirit or in church circles, the word God, or the term that I prefer, the word source. I'm so busy talking about it that I haven't really had a chance to experience it, especially today when our lives are so fast and so noisy and we just get going. So when I retired, I could have just said, sure, what I want to do is just retire and relax and maybe, become a supply preacher and fill in for ministers who need someone on a Sunday morning or something like
Mhm.
that. But it just, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to experience the holy. I wanted to experience a spirit. And so I moved up to the woods of South Carolina, built myself a little house, which I live in today. I was going to stay there for 1 year and go on a spiritual retreat for 1 year. That was more than 15 years ago, and I'm still here. And I even had a Bible verse in mind, it taken from the book of Genesis, when the story when Jacob and Esau are fighting with each other, and Esau has vowed to kill his brother, and Jacob has to flee for his life. And finally, years later, they're both older, wiser. Jacob comes back and he wants to meet his brother Esau and see if they can reconcile. But he's on one side of the river. Esau is on the other side of the river, and he's doing what we all do at night when we're worried and when we're wondering what's going to happen. He was pacing back and forth. And the Bible says this strange thing. Says that Jacob saw a man and wrestled with him until daybreak. Of course, that's just what you do when you meet a stranger. You wrestle, right? Well, that's what Jacob did. And sure enough, when daybreak came, he realized that he was wrestling with God. And he said the words, I will not let you go until you bless me. What a powerful metaphor that is. Wrestling with spirit, wrestling with the unknown, wrestling with source, wrestling with God. So that's what I did. I came up here with that Bible verse on my mind. I will not let you go until you bless me. And I was kind of affirmed in that because it's a strange verse to have in your mind when you retire from ministry. But I was confirmed by something that happened years later. Quite a few years ago now, I was asked to go to Cornwall in the UK to give a talk about the roots of world religion.
Mhm.
And while I was there, I had a wonderful, wonderful talk with a bunch of great people down in Cornwall. But I couldn't leave England without visiting a little town called Fenny Compton, which is up northwest of London. And I had to visit there because that's where my ancestors came from. They were ministers in the Church of England, and they preached in this little stone church in Fenny Compton. It still stood there. And I don't know how many generations ago it was, great, 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 great grandfather or whatever. But at any rate, I made the connections up there with a local historian, and she met me outside the church in the morning, and she let me into the church, and I was able to stand in the pulpit where my ancestor preached and look at the same church that he looked at and look at the same stained glass windows that he looked at. And one of the stained glass windows that he saw every Sunday when he was up there was something that I've never seen depicted in a stained glass window before. It was a picture of Jacob wrestling with God, saying, I will not let you go until you bless me. I have no doubt that somehow that long lost relative of mine managed to pass some spiritual DNA down to me, because that was the verse that was on my mind when I came out here to South Carolina. And lo and behold, my prayer was answered. I met the source. I met the spirit that I was striving to understand my whole life. It didn't come to me through Christianity. It came through pagan shamanism, actually. It was right there in nature all along. And through that, I started, for some reason, I still don't know why to this day, I started dowsing. And I discovered earth energies, and I discovered the ability to be able to even douse for spirits. And I've had a couple of occasions where people have asked me to come into a house where something weird was happening, and I would sit down there and talk with them and go in with my dowsing rods, and in some cases just have some wonderful experiences. But then, having gone through this, which is a real change, I made the mistake of starting to write books about it. And 20 books later, here I am. And I'm out here in the woods in South Carolina, still writing books and taking place in all of this magical stuff, like being able to put on a set of headphones and talking to a microphone to someone who's 3,000 miles away. It
Yeah.
still blows me right away. But at any rate, one of the books that I wrote was one of the first ones I wrote was a book called The Religion Book, which led to a book about Armageddon, which led to a publisher calling me up and saying, "We want a book on cults." Now, it's not something that I would have sat down and probably written if I'd had my chance, because boy, you have to dive into some pretty deep and muddy waters when you're talking about some of these American cults all over the world. But there are so many of them around the world that we had to limit it to American cults. And so while I was writing American cults, lo and behold, it seems like when I write about something here, the news is full of it. And now we've got, for some reason, my daughter was telling me the other day, she watches this one series on television, and she was amazed 5 different times over the course of a couple of weeks, and shows that she watched, they were cop shows about people who were caught in cults. And of course, my whole life being in the church, so many cults have split off from Christianity that I was very familiar with it. I was part of the movement back in the 70s, was it, when Jim Jones and Jim Baker and Jim Swaggart, kind of bothered me, all those ministers named Jim.
Right.
But at any rate, it just seemed to write itself. So in one sense, it was kind of a labor of love. I was able to take 40 years basically of research and put it between the covers of a book. But in another sense, I'm not sure I've recovered from writing about it yet. It's just so sad, and it's a part of so many people's lives. And then, of course, since the book came out and talking to people such as yourself, I've been contacted by a lot of people whose lives have just been absolutely transformed because they were involved in a cult. Most of the ones who contact me they found a way to get out of it, but it's only going to get worse, I'm afraid, because we are in a nation, the United States, which is just really susceptible to the methodologies of a cult, which I think we'll probably be talking about in a little bit.
Mhm. Why do people gravitate towards cults?
Yeah, that's the serious question, isn't it? We all like to think that, well, I would never do that. But unfortunately, the studies that have been done show that it's not a matter of who you are, it's where you are in your life when you become susceptible. Um, a person gravitates to a cult usually because they are feeling alone, they are feeling neglected, they are feeling unwanted, they are feeling unloved. And in these last 3 years, with the COVID crackdown and everything else, more and more people have been spending time by themselves, alone in the house, set with their computer. And here on the computer, all of a sudden, you find somebody who has an interest that's similar to yours, and so you get deeper involved in it and deeper involved in it. And pretty soon you find, either online or in most cases in cults, at least in the historical past, most cases people um, a visit and they discover something that is missing in their life. They discover a kind of a family, a welcoming group. You get out of your car in the parking lot of, say, a hotel or something like that, where this group is having a meeting for the weekend, and maybe a friend invites you to go with them or something like that, and so
Mhm.
you do, and you go in, and immediately out in the parking lot, there you got people shaking your hand and saying, "Welcome, we're so glad to have you." And you go into the meeting area in perhaps this big um, hotel, or maybe it's a church or something like that, or somebody's house. But you got to find welcoming people who are there to shake your hand and make you feel needed, make you feel wanted, make you feel loved. And then they start the pitch. The music is pumping and people are dancing and going through all this stuff and everything else. And it's really exciting. And you start to all of a sudden say, wow, where have you guys been all my life? I feel welcome here. This is like family. And so you listen, and the testimonies start. Somebody stands up and says, "Oh, I had $5 to my name, and then I bought this starting packet, and now I've got a pink Cadillac," or something like that,
Right.
and you hear all these stories, and you say, "This is fantastic." And then the talented talker gets up in front, and he starts saying, "Wow, this can change your life." And of course, it usually costs some money. You either have to donate or buy something or something like that. And eventually, when the weekend is over, you go home and you say, "Wow, this is fantastic." And so you start putting it to use, and nothing happens. You get right back into your old ways again. So you go back to the next meeting, and there they tell you, well, the problem is probably the family or the friends that you have. They're holding you back because they
Right.
don't understand things the way you do, and all this kind of stuff. So they gradually wean you away from your family, and pretty soon the cult is your life. What bothers me about this whole system is that I was a church pastor for 40 years, and without realizing it, I even use some of these same techniques. I encourage my people, when they come in the door, shake their hands, sit with them, make them feel welcome, go to coffee hour, talk, and people, and I would be the talented talker who would give the message, this can change your life and all this kind of stuff. And so people all of a sudden found a family, and I didn't mean to. I didn't want to use those kind of methodologies. I just didn't know any better because that's how it's done. And unfortunately, that's happening in just literally every walk of life in America today. When you say, why do people join cults? How does it happen? That's why they're looking for something that is missing. That's why it's so hard to get people out of cults, because when you have a good friend or a family member who's involved in this cult, you go to them and you try to use facts, and this isn't true or that isn't true.
Mhm.
Even if you pull them out, you're taking them away from something, but you're not adding that thing that they went to the cult for in the first place.
Mhm.
So I would love to say that cults are a thing of the past, but I'm afraid it's only getting worse. I really am. A lot of it is, of course, the social media. The computer makes it
Mhm.
easier, and you can meet people who you would never have known about before, and now all of a sudden, boom, they're part of your life, and you gradually get sucked in deeper and deeper until you find yourself in this situation. It's a rough road.
Well, let's talk about some of these cults. I mean,
Yeah.
what about Scientology? How do you feel about that?
Well, I've found that, especially having, I had to name some of these
Sure.
groups in the book, and I found that since the book came out, I really don't like to put a label of a cult on something,
Mhm.
um, because cults are not all, consisting of a bunch of bad people out to get you.
Right.
There are a lot of people who have found great value. A lot of people call Scientology a cult. Tom
Mhm.
Cruise, for one. I mean, who call it a life affirming thing. But there are a lot of people who have left Scientology and who call it a cult. So
Mhm.
all I can say is, if you're ever involved in a cult, for instance, Scientology, or any kind of a movement, whether it's a Christian church or an economic um, how-to thing, or whether it's a political party or anything like that. when you find those things beginning to happen, and you look around and you say something isn't right, listen to your heart, because only you will know for sure. So when you say, is Scientology a cult? I'm not going to call it a cult, but I will say that in Scientology, there are probably um, the possibility of forming cults, just like there is in basically any religion or anything like that too. The possibilities are there, and we have to take over our own lives, have to take over the reins of our own life. Otherwise, we're going to be caught up in it, and a lot of people are.
And it's sad because not all of the cults and badly, as they say.
Yeah, yeah,
They're not all the Branch Davidians. They're not Jim Jones out
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
there's
but
there's a saying in theology, being a theologian all my life, we used to say that cults plus time equals religion. A lot of groups that were called cults at the beginning are now certified religion. Christianity is called by many theologians a Jesus cult. For the first 200 years, 300 years of its existence, it was called a Jesus cult that existed embedded in Judaism. And indeed, it was at the very beginning. These people were a cult, but of course, 2,000 years later, the cult has been standardized, and a lot of different groups have broken away from it. We look at American history. My favorite example is when we read history books, it tells us about the Pilgrims coming to New England. And we see they're always depicted as these far-seeing people who wanted to build a shining city on a hill or something like that. We forget they were kicked out of where they were because they were a cult. They were called separatists, and they came over here to find a place for their cult, just like Jim Jones went down to Guyana to build a shining city on a hill, in his words. And the Pilgrims came here to do the same thing. And as soon as they built that shining city and had cities like Boston and other places like it, what did they do? They started kicking out anybody who didn't agree with their own cultic theology. They kicked out the Quakers. They kicked out the Shakers. They persecuted women in the famous Salem witch trials, women who didn't fit the mold of that particular cultic idea of Puritanism. And here was Cotton Mather, who was one of the leaders of the cult, one of the foremost Christian preachers in New England. He went to the witch trials, and he sat there and didn't say a thing. He just watched it happen as these innocent women were first persecuted and then later sometimes died horrible deaths or were whipped or beaten. And it was all because the Puritans had established this cult, and they didn't want anybody associated with it who wasn't there. And the early Puritans of New England did the very same thing that so many cultic leaders did to their followers. They just persecuted them, beat them, treated them horribly. And most of their story, or many of their stories, are written in the book American Cults, that's for sure.
when you talk about cults, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, like you say, is people that cut themselves off from their family and friends to be involved in this, because that's the only, and it makes sense, because if it's making you feel good and you get involved with it, you want to be with them more and more.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time you're sucked in, it's too late.
Yeah. You hit the nail right on the head when you said at the beginning it makes you feel good. People wouldn't stay with a cult if they didn't have an initial experience that was somewhat at least positive. The cult supplies a need, and if it were to end there, that would be fine. The problem is that cults are they're almost always exposed by their leadership. And often the leadership starts off just great. We've been talking a little about Jim Jones. So just take him as an example. He was a mainline Methodist preacher from Indiana, and eventually he was, you know, called to be the pastor of this church, and he got involved with the Assemblies of God. The Assemblies of God are now a bona fide Christian religion, a very reputable group. But even they looked at what he was doing and pretty soon they excommunicated him. He was part of what he called the latter rain movement. And step by step by step, he went from being a typical mainstream type preacher to a cult leader. You could almost see it happening when he went to New York. Father Divine was starting his own group, which is the peace movement, peace mission. And at the time, his group was considered a cult. Now it's a lot of historians look upon it as being part of the early civil rights movement. But his group was considered a cult. However, when Jim Jones was talking to Father Divine after he was trying to get advice on how to run this burgeoning group that was around him. So he said to Father Divine, I have one more trouble you can help me with. And Father Divine said, what is that? And he said, well, some of the women in my congregation are registering or making me think perhaps improper thoughts. What do I do? And Father Divine said, well, these thoughts have got to be brought to the surface and acted upon so you can then begin to deal with them. Wow. Jim Jones went and did exactly that. And you can just see in his story, step by step by step, starting off a perfectly normal, perfectly mainstream type guy until eventually there were so many complaints about him and there were so many investigations. He took his group and went down to Guyana. And down there, they were going to build a city on a hill, a shining city on a hill, just like the Pilgrims did. But down there in Guyana, it was just terrible. And of course, freed from the wraps of a government, which was looking over his shoulder, he got away with all kinds of things down there. And children were working inhuman hours. And eventually, when word got out to Representative, I think it was Leo Ryan, I think his name was,
Right.
who decided that he was going to go down and check it out because so many of his constituents were saying, we've lost touch with our family. They're down in Guyana someplace. And so he went down, and what he found just absolutely appalled him. And Jones knew that the jig was up, and so he slaughtered the whole party. Some of them got away and into the desert. I mean, into the wilderness there in the jungle. But he slaughtered the rest of them. And then, knowing what was going to happen, it was going to get out. That was where he convinced his crowd. They had already had practice doing this, and he convinced them all to, well, the proper term is drink the Kool-Aid. It wasn't really Kool-Aid, but it was laced with cyanide. And then so many people committed suicide. And what the heartbreaking thing is, the group that went down there and discovered all the bodies lying there on the in the compound itself, to see all these young children whose parents actually murdered their own children and then took their own lives. And they did it because they thought that God was on their side. They had been so brainwashed by this charismatic preacher who became narcissistic and then went on to become an actual psychopath. It was a terrible, terrible story. And all because of the power of how cults can work when they have that leadership who really craves power, and when they have people who want a simple way to solve the problems of their life, and they're just saying, I don't want to figure it out. I can't figure it out. It's too complicated. Just tell me what to do and how to do it, and I'll be happy. And so they accept it. It's a tragedy. It's just a real tragedy.
It is a tragedy. And even in today's society, and I don't want to wag fingers at people in the political climate that's been for the last 8 years. That's I mean, that can be contributed thought as cultish as well. I mean,
yeah. Well, a lot of people are referring. I mean, I talk about this in the book to some of these organizations that were down there on January 6th, and a lot of people are referring to them as cults. A lot of them are white nationalist groups. We see it happening over and over again. We think the Ku Klux Klan is dead. That was one of the biggest and most effective cults that America has ever seen. And now some of these white nationalist groups are doing the same thing. It used to be in church. I remember when Jerry Falwell launched his moral majority, he said, we have to get people saved, we have to get them baptized, and then we have to get them registered to vote. And now the latest ones, some of these evangelical preachers have taken it even farther. We got to get people to hold their Bibles in one hand and their loaded guns in the other, and that's just pure cult-like stuff, and
Yeah.
so much of it is done in the name of God.
Mhm.
Oh, what a terrible travesty that is. But it's happening, and it's very real. And I certainly don't know what the answer is, but kind of feeling I can't do much, but I can at least write about it, try to bring it up
Oh,
into the
absolutely.
surface.
It just boggles my mind that, like I said, the last 8 years, as you're watching as we're watching all this unfold, that people in the United States, because everybody's smart. I mean, I'm going to say it.
Hmm.
We're an intelligent bunch. That's
Hmm.
why we're the top in the world and all this. And to see this happening and people getting
Yeah.
sucked in, it just boggles
Yeah,
the mind.
yeah. Well, it's amazing to me. One of the hallmarks of a cult is not bringing people together. They bring people
Mhm.
together within the cult, but
Sure.
then it's us against them, and it's division. And so many of the people in the cult won't even listen to
Mhm.
anybody who's not in the cult. And we
Absolutely.
find that now people on both the left and the right, they'll listen
Mhm.
to their own news and only their own news because that's all the information they want to hear. So a
Mhm.
lot of them don't even know that there's another story,
Mhm.
and that's pure cultic methodology. That's the
Yeah.
methods the cult use to get you to separate, to divide us against them. God is on our side, all that kind of thing. Terrible thing.
Now, with your book and writing this, how hard was it to do the research on this? And were you able to interview people that were in cults
Yeah,
or people that had
yeah.
left, or how'd that work?
Yeah, that was probably the saddest part of it. I contacted and talked to a lot of people whose names I disguised in the book for obvious reasons.
Hmm.
But I talked to a lot of people and heard some just terrible stories. Many of them who didn't even join the cult. They were born into the cult. Their mother and dad joined the cult. And a lot of these cults began to flourish during the 60s. That's when you saw people like Manson and all the rest
Sure.
of them in their 70s, and a lot of them flourished during that time when I was young. And when I first began ministry, I would have local cults who during the summer would be living in the woods around the little town where we lived, and sometimes I had to go in there and pull my youth group kids out of that environment because they were kind of caught in it. They were absolutely convinced that so and so was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ and he's going to solve my life. I even had a gun pulled on me at one time, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
I did get shot at once. Not I don't know if it was cultic activity, but it was just a a terrible thing. And a lot of these people in the 60s and the 70s um, belonged to these cults. Some of them belonged to communes that were nothing wrong with them. They
Sure.
didn't grow. They didn't grow into cults, but a lot of them went to these different communes. But a few of them did become cults. Manson, of course, is only the one idea that one that sticks in my mind. First of all, a lot of them did become cults, and now they're the people who join that culture, in some cases, the grandparents of some kids nowadays, who were actually born into a cult and had to get their own way out. You find in the Latter Day Saints, there were a number of cults that split off from the Latter Day Saints, and that doesn't say anything bad about the Latter Day Saints
Yes.
because a lot of cults have split off a lot of religions. But some of these cults, back in the old days, especially, they were just brutal. And some of them, when the United States government wouldn't recognize Utah as a state until they gave up their doctrine of plural wives,
Right.
um, a lot of cults broke off from the Mormon church and said, no, we're going to practice in different ways. And so a man would take his 4 or 5 wives and go off, and their kids were born into that idea and they didn't know anything else. They weren't allowed to know anything else. So that's what they grew up with. When that happens, and when I had to interview people who were in those kinds of situations, some of them even my age, remembering back to what it was like, even after 40, 50, 60 years, they would remember and tears would come to their eyes. And sometimes they hadn't talked about it with anybody for all this time because they felt ashamed of themselves. They felt something was wrong with them. And that's another great thing that cults do. They can make you feel like it's somehow your fault.
Hmm.
If you're having troubles. If you ever anybody ever has a friend who says, I'm doing this, or I'm telling you this for your own good.
Yeah.
You know the kind of pressure that can go on and the kind of pressure that people can be under. So, yeah, I did interview a lot of people. And of course, I had done a lot of historical research throughout my life. So a lot of it was just getting it all down on paper. But it was sad in a lot of ways. Very, very few times. And I still I have a contact page on my website, jimwillis.net. And after I've been on a couple of these shows talking about American cults, I would get contact people writing to me who just wanted to tell me their story. They didn't even want me to respond. They just wanted to tell me their story. They needed to get it out. And sometimes it's heartbreaking, just heartbreaking.
When you think about the cults in the United States, which one do you think was probably the worst? Like the Branch Davidians, or which one?
Oh, it's hard. It's hard to tell because some of the ones that were the worst are now bona fide religion or bona fide establishments. I think probably the ones that were hardest to write about. Uh, David Koresh and the Branch Davidians was certainly one of them because that was a tragedy. Um, David Koresh was a Seventh day Adventist. Now, Seventh day Adventism itself was once called a cult. Now it's a bona fide religion right up there with any Christian Protestant religion. But David Koresh was too extreme. And so his name was Vernon Howell. Um, he was uh, he had a lot of power. I'll tell you, when in his group, he was absolutely convinced that the end was coming. He read that you're supposed to go forth and multiply. Well, no one in the group was permitted to multiply except him, and he had 20 wives. But Koresh was convinced that he was the Messiah, and these women were absolutely somehow brainwashed, convinced that they were, in effect, having a baby by the Messiah, just like Mary was supposed to have a baby by God, that kind of thing. And he began, when he was so convinced that the apocalypse was coming, he began to work on his book, on the book of Revelation, the final book of the of the New Testament in the Bible, which is a real apocalyptic literature. I mean, there's lights in the sky and angels coming down and noises and dragons and all this kind of stuff. The end was going to come with a rush. So what he had to do, he decided, was to start stockpiling weapons, and he began to really develop a great horde that they were going to use to protect themselves when the end came. uh, and ATF decide that they had to serve some warrants with all these illegal weapons coming in and out and evidence of them there. So when the ATF showed up, 4 of their agents were killed by the people within the compound. So it was given over to the FBI, and the FBI surrounded the compound and 51 days around that little compound in Waco.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, though, just to show how we need to know how to operate with this. It's my personal opinion that the FBI was absolutely right and that they had to shut this thing down, but they went about it exactly in the wrong way. What they did was surround this compound and they bombarded it with loud speakers, rock music coming 24 hours a day, and lights in the sky and helicopters flying over. Well, this was the day when people didn't have cell phones. The people within the compound, they didn't know that this was a unique thing to Waco, Texas. They thought that this might have been going on all over the world. They didn't know the difference. And what the FBI did basically was to recreate exactly the very same kind of loud, noisy, confusing environment that David Koresh said was going to happen when the world came to an end.
Right.
So these people were convinced the world is coming to an end. And eventually, when they decided to, and the FBI decided to storm the compound, nobody still knows how it happened. Maybe one of the smoke bombs hit something. Maybe the people set it off themselves. We don't know. But there's a great fire started, and all of those people were killed. Just another tragedy that happened not only because of a cult leader who was able to establish a following and gradually, step by step, get into this, but also by our ignorance of cults. We didn't handle the situation well. at all.
Right.
And it was just another terrible tragedy. So I guess probably because I lived through that one and followed it so closely, that was probably one of the roughest ones to write about.
Cults don't have to be that big, like the Branch Davidians. It could be a small thing, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. And historically, there were many of these groups that were. I'm thinking, for instance, oh, I don't know, the group called the Anthill Kids.
Mhm.
Um, Roque Thurlt and the Anthill Kids. He wanted to grow his flock, so what he did, he fathered 20 kids by 9 different women. Well, that's one way to make your group grow, I guess.
Mhm.
And he wanted to discipline them, and it was a real pathological discipline. It was really torture. It wasn't discipline. I mean, everything from cutting off body parts and all this kind of stuff. And it was just a small group that never really would have amounted to anything, except one person managed to get out and alert the world to what was going on. And then she was so bereft without her group, she actually went back and was there back in the cult when the cult was finally discovered. It was just a small group, but it had an effect on so many people. What a terrible, terrible situation it was. And of course, nowadays it can be even worse because these people might not even know each other, but because of the dark web, a lot in the deep web and the dark web,
Mhm.
a lot of people have find themselves involved in cultic stuff without ever meeting face to face anybody else in their group. They just talk to them on the computer.
Mhm.
And because there are so many people who are feeling lost, and so they just sit there in their house, and that makes them more lost, and they may sit there in a darkened basement or bedroom or something and just be involved in all of this stuff. And cults really thrive on conspiracy theory, and they really thrive on telling the future. The world is about to come to an end. Well, unfortunately, our news programs today like to thrive and make money themselves. And how do they do that? They make you afraid.
Sure.
You don't want to miss anything. And then how do they make you afraid? Well, they start talking about conspiracy theories, and they start talking about how terrible things are and everything's going to come to an end. That's how they get you. They make you afraid. And then they say, don't worry, there's a number of us who see it coming. And when the end comes, we'll be able to make it. And so I think probably I like to call it the cult of the internet is probably one of the biggest cults in the country nowadays, but it's in so many little cells here and there and everywhere that it's hard to tell. I find it fascinating that the big news over the last couple of days about a major broadcaster being fired from, major network, the biggest broadcaster in the country, fired from a major network. And why? Because he was using his platform, and the television station was using their platform to promote these conspiracy theories.
Mhm.
Now, maybe there's some truth in some of this. I don't know, but the point is that that's how news works. We want to make you afraid,
Yeah,
and then one thing leads to another.
absolutely. For people that, like you say, the ones that are home alone, looking at their computers and all this, and they get involved in this stuff, what are signs that the family and others can look for?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. Uh, when someone becomes more and more um, disjointed, when they more and more less and less attached, let's say that
Mhm.
they seem to live in a world of their own. That can be a sign of course, loneliness, and it can be a sign of something is wrong. But then when a person starts saying things that may not, you wonder, wait a minute, where did he or she get that?
Mhm.
You have to listen to what they're saying, and it's important to be there at the beginning when this is happening, because as we've seen, step by step, that's how cults get you.
Mhm.
And when a person begins to start talking about some of these crazy theories that you say, wait a minute, you never talked about this before. And when a person becomes more and more disattached from friends and community, when they're spending more and more time alone, or when they're disappearing off to meetings, they'll just say, or something like that, you have to be careful of that. And then you say, well, what do you do? Well, uh, I wish there was an answer. I wish there was an easy bumper sticker answer that said, say this, do this, and you can win them back from the cult. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work. The only thing that really works, and in my experience, I've seen a lot of cult busting stuff, or deprogrammers or something like that, that use violent methods and kidnapping and all this kind of stuff. That doesn't work. The only thing you can do is love them to death. You've got to be there. You've got to reach out in love, and you've got to be understanding. And you can't let them get under your skin when they'll try to, say, well, don't you understand? Are you too stupid to understand what I can see and all my friends say, and you can't see it? It's hard. Being a minister, I have to fall back on a Bible verse. We had talked about fear being the key to cults, and there's a wonderful Bible verse in 1 John that says, "Perfect love casts out fear." The only way you can triumph over fear is through love. The only trouble is that in this divisive world, we're seeing a whole lot more hate than love. And quite frankly, it scares me to death. It really does. We're so far involved in it right now. It's been gradually building. These cults have been mixing with political movements, which have been mixing with religious movements, which have been mixing with economic movements. And now some of them are so intertangled, you just can't pull them apart. I have pastor friends from various states, and I have some friends who are heads of their synagogue in various states. I was just talking to one, the president of his synagogue down in Texas, and I was telling him over we bunch of us from college get together and talk about stuff, and I was talking about the book, and I was talking about how these cults are starting to insinuate themselves. He said, in my synagogue, he said, I've got what they call the panic button. I push the button, and if I don't let up on it within a couple of seconds, I'm going to have a SWAT team here in a minute. Because he said so many of our synagogues, like so many of the churches, they have been victimized and by these people who are radical cult members. And unfortunately, it's such a fact of life in America today.
Yes.
And here I was saying about how news broadcasters want to get you afraid. I'm doing the same thing.
Well, I mean,
it's terrible.
A show like this is to get the message out. I mean,
Well, I
that's
hope
what
so.
it's about, to help
Yeah,
people.
I hope so. I
got in this to help people, just like when I became a journalist. That was my goal. It wasn't to earn that Nobel Prize or any writing prize. It was so if a story I wrote helped at least one person out there, I was happy.
Yeah, and that's the other side of the internet. You're on the other side. You're doing important work because you're bringing these subjects out to people who would never hear about them otherwise. And you can use the same methodology that the cults use, but you can use it for good and not bad. And that's what you're doing. So it's important. It really is. It's important work.
Another question I was thinking about is, why is it's the highly intelligent? This is what gets me too. It's the really highly intelligent people that get sucked into this stuff.
Yeah. Unfortunately, some of the most intelligent are recognized by the cult, and they use that intelligence, and so they become leaders. And that's how it's really, cults have a pyramid type thing. The top leader, but then he appoints around him people that agree with him. Political leaders do the same thing. They use their trusted people around them, and then those people have trusted people, and the more intelligent you are, the more you can use this. And of course, you can start to see the power begin to grow, and you can say, well, I kind of like this. I didn't have any power out there in the world, but here in this group, people listen to me. I've got some important stuff, going on in my life right now. And then, of course, when you get involved, it's really hard. It's just kind of like gambling. You gamble and you start to lose money, so you bet more to try to win back the money you lost, and then you lost more. It's just like that with cults. You get so much invested in these cults, so much time, so much money, so much effort, and pretty soon you say, if I were to turn my back on this cult right now, I would be turning my back on something that I put so much into. And now if I pull away from it, what am I going to have? Just a lot of loss, nothing. And then intelligence is no barrier. And matter of fact, sometimes the more intelligent a person is, the more susceptible they are, especially if it's a group that brings in science to their group or something like that. Um, and it doesn't help any that so much in our society just looks down their noses at this so much.
Right.
One of the things that really surprised me, being a staunch believer that we are not alone in the universe, one of the things that really surprised me was how many cults could take that belief that we are not alone in the universe and turn it into something that was much more evil. Um, the idea of saying, well, I'm not really a human, I'm really alien, or I
Right.
was attracted by an alien or something like that. And and so you get a person who's um, really is convinced that there may be a life out there in the universe, and maybe some of it is latched onto us. Maybe these UFO sightings are real, but then what does the government do? The government decides to cover it up. Cults thrive in darkness. And so an intelligent person will be able to say, wait a minute, the government told us there was nothing at Area 51. And then they said there was nothing to it. They closed the books. And then 25 years later, Project Blue Book surfaces. And we say, wait, all along they were lying to us.
Right.
Well, it's only natural then that you're going to want to join some group that says, I know the truth. So here they can take even a perfectly good bona fide idea, and it's easy to do that and turn it into something. Just as these cults split off from Christianity, so cults can split off from groups that want to know more about what's going on out there in the universe. It doesn't help any either that nowadays we have these talking head, everybody from scientists to religious leaders to everything else. They have all of these ideas and everything else. And then they come on, and rather than criticize by using facts to back them up, because they sometimes don't have the facts, they start attacking a person's character instead. That just leads to more division, more hate. And it really offends me when I start to hear somebody just ridiculing the idea of, for instance, earlier civilizations or life out there in the universe or something. It offends me when they ridicule it, not with facts, but saying, what do you know? All you are is a pseudoscientist or something like that. You're just a writer. What do you know? Well,
Right.
that offends me. And if I wasn't careful, I could probably be drawn into some of these groups that say, well, let's fight back, and let's build this stuff up. And then it turns into a power trip, and another cult starts all over again.
Absolutely.
Sad
Absolutely.
thing. Sad thing.
While you were writing the book and you were interviewing people for the book, did any of the cults contact you? Because I would think they would be on the defense.
Not while I was writing it, but afterwards, a few did. I've had a target on my back in some cases. Thank goodness nobody knows really where I am. But they can reach me through the internet. They can reach me through Facebook. They can reach me through my social media. And I've had some real wild ones. Some of them are frankly a little scary.
I can
But
imagine.
that's what happens, I guess.
I can imagine. Now, when we talk about, again, going back to cults, you can kind of see, like you're saying, at some point, whatever they're doing switches
Hmm.
in a more cult-like behavior.
Hmm.
And you can kind of see that happening with stuff that's going on right now.
Yeah,
That where
yeah,
people are starting to get more involved in these cults without realizing they're in there. I mean,
sure,
it's just
sure.
why
And
is it
yeah,
because we're at a point in our lives now as a society that people need more more from their lives, and that's why they're getting involved with these things?
I think so. I think so. Yeah, I really do. And it's a shame. I've seen families divided up and bitter. Um,
Hmm.
Thanksgiving dinners turn into hate, and uh, it's it's just sad. That's all.
And
Boy.
I agree with you. It's hard. It's hard if you see something like that and you're trying to help somebody and say, look, this is the truth of what's happening, but they don't
Hmm.
want to hear it because they're going to believe what they're going to believe, no
Yeah.
matter what, and that's what makes it so difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. It really does make it difficult. And I've come to the conclusion that most people, um, when it comes to stuff like this, or religion, or culture, anything like that, most people already decide what they believe, and then they go to muster facts to bolster up what they believe,
Hmm.
rather than follow the facts to try to determine what they believe. And a lot of people say, I don't care, I'm just going to ignore it. you know
Hmm.
Same thing is happening politically nowadays. Let's face it. I
Hmm.
remember the good old, I guess we're just about out of time, but I remember the good old days when I was living up in Massachusetts, and Tip O'Neill was our uh, Speaker of the House from Massachusetts, a flaming liberal, really out there on the left. And then he came, and then of course Ronald Reagan came to town, the conservative from California, and Tip and Ronald Reagan, they couldn't disagree more on politics. They really couldn't. But at the end of
Hmm.
the day, they could put it all to the side, kick back, pour a beer, put up their feet on the table and on the desk, and start selling Irish stories to each other. They
Hmm.
respected each other as individuals, as people, as men, even though they didn't agree on anything. Nowadays, that's becoming very, very hard to find.
Hmm. Absolutely. One last question. You're
Okay.
on the strip in Las Vegas. And then there's you and there's about like three or four other guys selling, trying to sell similar books to yours. How do you draw people in to read your book?
Wow. I've never been asked that question. you know, I I honestly don't know. I I guess because I have decided at the ripe old age of 77, I will probably never be famous. And if I'm not famous, I mean, if I ever do get famous, I hope nobody knows me. that, that's ironic, of course. And my job now, I guess, I just feel like I just got to put it out there. And I have a great belief in something greater than ourselves, that the consciousness, the source that is running this universe. And
Hmm.
if a person needs it, they will be drawn to it. And I just rather trust that rather than try to sell it myself.
Absolutely. Well, what's next for you?
I'm working on a book right now on near-death experiences,
Cool.
and that'll be published by Visible Ink Press, and probably it'll be like next spring, maybe a year from now, before it comes out. Because if I get it to them in the fall, it takes them that long to finish the book.
Hmm.
Within a couple of weeks, certainly by the 1st of May, it was sort of first part of May, I'm going to have a book come out, which is kind of a spiritual autobiography for me. It's called Cosmo and Me,
Hmm.
and a seeker's journey from religion to spirituality. And it's being published by Uncle Bear Publishing, and it should be up on Amazon within a week or so, I would think. Matter of fact, I think the manuscript was just sent in Monday, so it won't be too long. And I've done audiobooks for those, and that's something else I had to learn, how to do an audiobook. And so when you put it all together, it's keeping me busy, keeping me off the streets, that's for sure.
It sounds like it. But that next book you have, is it that the Cosmo one you're talking about?
Hmm.
Sounds interesting, and then the one that that focuses on you, I think that would be fascinating to read as well.
Well, it's kind of the story of my life, but it's not just, I did this and then I did that.
Right.
It's a story of the last 7 decades that I've lived through in American history. I was born in 46, so the decade of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and on. Each one of them has been different. Um, and so when you're a spiritual seeker within that decade, you have to go about it a different way.
Hmm.
People looked for, we're on a spiritual quest. I call it quest for the Holy Grail. They did it differently in the 50s than they did in the 90s, or and then that they are doing now. because there were cultural influences at play. And that's what the book is really all about. So it's not really an autobiography, although I suppose it is that, an memoir, but it's really kind of a history lesson. How do you search for truth and ultimate meaning? And how do you find spirit within all these different cultures that have flourished during the last 7 decades of American history? If anybody wants to, to look into it, we'll be plastering it all over the front of the webpage, jimwillis.net. The webpage has all my books on it, and there's 20 of them right now, I guess, and all the reviews, both good and bad, and there's a contact page. I'd love to hear from you. Preferably after American Cults came out, preferably a nice contact would be good, rather than some of the other ones that I've been getting. But at any rate, it's there, jimwillis.net, and it is also links there to take you to my Facebook page and my YouTube page. We're bringing out YouTubes all the time on this kind of stuff. We have YouTubes on everything from dowsing to the birth of major world religions and everything else.
Fantastic. Jim, thank you so much for coming on. I so appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's been wonderful. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
Love to get you back on with some of your other books.
Anytime.
Okay.
Anytime.
All right. Well, you have a great rest of your day and evening, rather.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
Again, thank you so much.
Okay. We'll be in touch, I'm sure. Thank you so much.
Have a great one. All right. I love stuff like that. I love looking into cults. I mean, like I said, I was a crime court reporter, so I ran into stuff like that when I was on the beat. So it's interesting for me to have someone like Jim on. Tomorrow, Pamela Nance is a pre-recorded interview that I did. She's going to be with us talking about her paranormal experiences, and boy, does she have some interesting experiences with UFOs and aliens that she has a story to tell. And I think you guys might have saw the teaser that I put out when I put this thing over on the Patreon. So she'll be with us at 6:30 p.m. Pacific tomorrow. It'll be like I said. Oh, see, there is. It blinked out. See, the internet's doing weird things again. Back to where Mario goes. Just down. But she'll be in the pre-recorded tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Okay. Again, I want to thank my guest tonight. And if you guys like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. Again, we're equal opportunity here at California Haunts Radio. We're just trying to get the word out. And if you did like it and you're over watching from Facebook, please be sure to hit that follow button and give us a thumbs up, a heart, a smiley, or whatever you can do to keep us up in that algorithm. Same thing with YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so already. I'd appreciate it. It's one of those days. I would really appreciate it. And again, more smileys and hearts and all that good stuff, because that puts us up in the algorithm. I'm going to start making some changes to the YouTube page. I think you guys are going to like, and it's going to be a lot easier to find stuff. Like I say, I like to vary my topics. There's 581 videos over at YouTube, so I'm going to try and put them under categories, so you guys can just go in. If you're looking for cryptids, boom, you can go to a cryptid file, or you can go to a ghost file to look for the ghost stories, or the true crime stuff, boom, like this. That'll have its own file. You guys have to click. You don't have to go searching through a million videos to find the stuff. So I think that's going to work out a lot better. Okay, well, I'm going to call it a day, and I will see you tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Have a great day. Oh, and here's his contact information before I forget. That is website, jimwillis.net. And he does have 20 books out, so I had to pick and choose today. So you've got American Cults, which is what we discussed today. You've got Supernatural Gods, Ancient Gods. The Quantum Akashic Field, and Lost Civilizations. And of course, you can get those at his website and Amazon. And remember, he's got a lot more books. All right, guys, I will see you tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Have a great evening. Bye.